5 days before Christmas, Ethan Hale stood in the frozen mud of his dying ranch, holding two pieces of paper that represented everything he'd ever been. A foreclosure notice giving him 9 days to lose his family's legacy, and a crumpled advertisement he'd placed 3 weeks ago in desperate shame. Seeking wife. Land and future provided. He'd lied in that advertisement. There was no future here. Just debt, drought, and the hollow wind that hadn't stopped blowing since his father died. The stagecoach was late. The woman it carried had no idea she was arriving at the end of something, not the beginning. Before we begin, if you stay with me until the end of this story, please hit that like button and leave a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this journey travels. The wind came from the north that afternoon, the kind that cut through wool and settled into bone. Ethan Hale stood at the edge of his property line, one boot propped on the lowest rail of a fence that needed replacing, watching the road that led into town. The wood beneath his heel was rotted through. He could feel it give slightly under his weight, threatening to split completely if he pressed any harder. He didn't press harder. There wasn't much point in breaking things that were already broken. The sky had that particular quality of gray that came in late December, thick and low, pressing down on the plains like a hand. Snow threatened but never came, just cold that settled and stayed. Behind him, the ranch spread out in browns and grays, the barn with its sagging roof, the house with its cracked windows, the empty pastures where cattle should have been grazing but weren't because he'd sold the last of them in October. 300 acres, 4 generations, 9 days until the bank took it all. Ethan reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the notice again, though he'd already memorized every word. The paper had been folded and unfolded so many times it was starting to tear along the creases. Notice of foreclosure. Amount due. $3,847.52. Final payment. Deadline, December 29th, 1884. $3,847.52. It might as well have been $3 million. He'd spent the last 4 months scraping together everything he could, sold equipment, livestock, his father's watch, his mother's silver. He'd worked every odd job within riding distance. He'd eaten 1 meal a day and let the house go cold at night to save on firewood. He'd raised $630. The arithmetic was simple and brutal. He was going to lose. In the distance, a dark shape appeared on the road. Ethan straightened, his heart doing something complicated in his chest. The stagecoach. It was too far away to see clearly, but he knew the route, knew the schedule. It came through every other Tuesday, carrying mail and passengers from the territorial capital. Today it was carrying his last, desperate mistake. He pulled the second piece of paper from his pocket. The advertisement he'd placed in the Rocky Mountain News 3 weeks ago, when the walls had been closing in and panic had made him stupid. Rancher 34, seeks wife. 300 acres, established homestead, stable future. Prefer woman accustomed to frontier life. Serious inquiries only. Every word of it was a lie. Well, not every word. He was 34, and the land had been established once. But stable future? That was fiction. He'd written the ad at midnight after his third whiskey, sealed it with money he couldn't afford to spend, and sent it off before he could think better of it. 4 letters had come back. 4 women, each with their own reasons for answering an advertisement from a stranger. He'd read them all in the cold light of morning, feeling sick. He'd chosen Lydia Brooks because her letter had been the shortest. No flowery language, no romantic notions, just basic information. Age 31, unmarried, capable of hard work, seeking partnership and security. She'd included no photograph, no elaborate promises. The brevity had seemed honest. He'd written back immediately, before courage failed him. Told her to come before Christmas. Told her the ranch was waiting. Told her everything except the truth. The stagecoach was close enough now that he could hear it. The rattle of wheels, the sound of horses laboring through the cold. Ethan's hands were shaking. He shoved them in his pockets and started walking toward the road, his boots crunching through the frozen earth. What kind of man did this? What kind of man invited a woman into a sinking ship and pretended it was seaworthy? A desperate one, he thought. A man who'd run out of options and pride and sense. The stagecoach pulled to a stop in a cloud of dust and steam from the horse's breath. The driver, a weathered man named Collins who'd been running this route for 20 years, looked down at Ethan with an expression that might have been pity. "Hail," he said, by way of greeting. "Collins. Got a passenger for you." The driver climbed down, moving stiffly, and walked to the coach door. "Miss Brooks?" The door opened. She stepped down carefully, one hand gripping the frame for balance. Ethan had tried not to build a picture in his mind, tried not to imagine, but the woman who emerged from the stagecoach wasn't what he'd expected anyway. Lydia Brooks was tall, nearly as tall as he was, and thin in a way that suggested recent hardship rather than natural build. She wore a dark traveling dress that had been mended in several places, a coat that was too light for the weather, and a hat that had seen better years. Her face was angular, sharp-featured, with dark hair pulled back severely and eyes that were gray or blue. He couldn't tell in the flat winter light. Those eyes met his, and Ethan felt the assessment in them. She was taking his measure the same way he was taking hers, and he had the uncomfortable sensation that she was seeing more than he wanted to show. "Mr. Hale?" Her voice was quiet but clear, with an accent he couldn't quite place. Somewhere east, maybe. Educated. "Yes, ma'am." He stepped forward, pulled his hat off automatically. "Miss Brooks, welcome." She nodded once, a precise movement. "Thank you." Collins was pulling a trunk from the back of the coach, a single trunk, small and battered. Everything she owned, Ethan realized. Everything she'd brought to start a new life. The guilt sat in his stomach like a stone. "That all the luggage?" he asked. "It is." He moved to take the trunk from Collins, hefted it easily. It wasn't heavy. He'd carried feed sacks that weighed more. "I've got a wagon just over Mr. Hale." She was still standing by the coach, hadn't moved. "Before we go further, I'd like to be clear about the arrangement." Collins was already climbing back onto his seat, clearly eager to be away from whatever awkward scene was unfolding. Ethan set the trunk down. "All right." Lydia folded her hands in front of her, a gesture that seemed both nervous and controlled. "Your letter indicated an established homestead and stable prospects. I'm here seeking partnership and security, as I stated in my correspondence. I want to know if that's genuinely what you're offering." The question was direct, the eyes steady. Ethan felt sweat break out on his back despite the cold. He should tell her, right now before she took another step. He should tell her that the homestead was dying, and the prospects were a 9-day countdown to foreclosure. He should give her the chance to get back on that stagecoach and find somewhere else. Someone else. Something better than the disaster he was offering. He opened his mouth. "Yes, ma'am," he heard himself say. "That's what I'm offering." The lie came out smooth as glass. Something flickered in her expression. He couldn't read it. Relief? Doubt? She studied him for another long moment, then nodded. "Then I accept the arrangement as stated." The stagecoach pulled away behind them, Collins not even looking back. The sound of wheels and hoofbeats faded into the distance, and then there was just wind and silence, and the two of them standing in the road with a trunk full of lies between them. "The wagon's this way," Ethan said. He picked up the trunk and started walking. After a moment, he heard her footsteps following. The ranch came into view as they crested the small rise. The house first, then the barn, the empty corrals, the fields that had produced nothing but dust this year. Ethan watched Lydia's face as she took it in, tried to see it through her eyes. The house was 2 stories, built by his grandfather in 1847. It had been something once, solid, proud, a statement of permanence in uncertain country. Now it looked tired. Paint peeling, shutters hanging crooked, the porch sagging on one side. The barn was worse, its roof patched with mismatched boards, several of the stall doors hanging open because the latches were broken. The wind blew dust across the empty yard. Somewhere, a loose piece of tin was banging against the barn wall, a rhythmic clanging that had been going on for weeks because Ethan couldn't afford the nails to fix it properly. This was what he'd promised her. This wasteland, this failure. "It's quiet," Lydia said. Ethan glanced at her. She was still looking at the ranch, her expression unreadable. "Too quiet, probably. Nearest neighbor is 6 miles east. Town is 8 miles south." "I'm accustomed to quiet." He pulled the wagon up to the house and climbed down, reached up to help her. She took his hand. Her grip was firm, her palm calloused, and stepped down. Up close, he could see the exhaustion in her face, the shadows under her eyes. The journey from wherever she'd come had been long. "I'll show you inside," he said. "Get you settled." The house was as cold inside as out. Ethan had let the stove go dead this morning, trying to conserve the last of the firewood. Their breath came out in clouds as he led her through the front room. Sparse furniture, most of it old, a few photographs on the mantel of people who were gone now, and up the stairs. "This was my sister's room," he said, pushing open a door on the second floor. "She married 5 years back, moved to California. It's yours now." The room was small but clean. He'd spent yesterday sweeping it out, changing the sheets, trying to make it presentable. A bed, a dresser, a washstand with a basin and pitcher. One window looking out over the front of the property. Lydia stepped inside, set down the small bag she'd been carrying. She walked to the window and stood there, looking out. "I'll get your trunk," Ethan said, "and I'll start a fire downstairs, get some warmth in the place." "Thank you." He left her there and went back outside. The temperature was dropping. It would be below 0 tonight. He hauled the trunk up the stairs, left it outside her door, then went to work on the stove. The firewood pile was nearly gone. He'd need to cut more tomorrow, or they'd freeze. One problem at a time, he thought. First warmth, then food, then he didn't know. He'd gotten her here. He hadn't thought much beyond that. By the time Lydia came back downstairs, he had the stove going and coffee heating. She'd taken off her coat and hat, smoothed her hair. In the lamplight, she looked less severe than she had on the road, still guarded, still careful, but there was something almost vulnerable in the way she held herself. "Coffee?" he offered. "Please." He poured 2 cups, handed her one. They stood on opposite sides of the stove, warming their hands, not looking at each other. "It's late," Ethan said finally. "You must be tired from traveling. I thought we could have a simple supper and then—" "Mr. Hale." She set her cup down on the table. "I'd prefer if we could speak plainly." Something in her tone made him tense. "About what?" "About this." She gestured around them, a movement that encompassed the cold house, the failing ranch, everything. "I'm not a fool. I can see this place is struggling. I'd like to know what I've actually walked into." The moment stretched. Ethan could hear the wind outside, the creak of the house settling, his own heartbeat too loud in his ears. He could keep lying. Double down, make excuses, spin stories about bad luck and tough seasons and how things would turn around in the spring. He'd gotten good at that over the past months, convincing himself, convincing the bank, convincing anyone who'd listen that this was all temporary. But standing there, looking at this woman who'd come all this way based on his lies, who was asking for simple honesty, he found he didn't have another lie in him. "You want it plain?" he said. "All right. This ranch is dying. Has been for 2 years since the drought started. I've lost my livestock, my equipment, everything of value. I'm $3,000 in debt to the bank, and I have 9 days to pay it or they foreclose. There's a buyer circling, man named Garrett, owns half the territory already, waiting to pick up the pieces cheap." Lydia's face had gone very still. 9 days. "Yes, ma'am, until December 29th. And you invited me here knowing this." It wasn't a question. Ethan felt his jaw tighten. "I invited you here because I was desperate and stupid, and I thought, hell, I don't know what I thought. That maybe a miracle would happen, that maybe having someone else here would make a difference somehow, that I could fix it before you figured it out." He laughed, a bitter sound. "Turns out I couldn't even manage that. You've been here 2 hours and you already know." She picked up her coffee cup again, took a slow sip, her eyes never leaving his face. "You lied in your advertisement." "Yes." "You lied in your letters." "Yes." "You lied when I asked you directly, not an hour ago." "Yes." He met her gaze, forced himself not to look away. "I lied. All of it. You want to get back on that stagecoach next week? I'll pay your fare. You want to slap my face and curse my name? You've earned it. I'm a liar and a coward and a fool, and you deserve better than any of this." The silence that followed was heavy enough to suffocate. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. The stove ticked and crackled. Lydia stood there, perfectly still, her expression unreadable. Finally, she spoke. "Where would I go?" The question caught him off guard. "What?" "If I left." Where would I go? She set the cup down again, folded her arms across her chest. I spent everything I had to get here, Mr. Hale. The train fare, the stagecoach, supplies for the journey. I have $11 left to my name. I have no family, no position waiting, no prospects. I came here because this was my only option. Her voice was still quiet, but there was steel underneath now. So, before you tell me about stagecoach fares, perhaps you should consider that you're not the only desperate person in this room. Ethan felt like he'd been punched. I'm sorry. I didn't know. Of course you didn't. You didn't ask. She moved to the window, looked out at the darkening ranch. My father was a blacksmith in Philadelphia, taught me the trade before he died. I worked his shop for 7 years, but when he passed, his debts were more than the business was worth. Creditors took everything. I tried to find work, but no one wants to hire a woman smith. Too unconventional, too threatening. The bitterness in those words was sharp. I saw your advertisement and thought perhaps on the frontier things might be different, that a homestead might need skills more than propriety. A blacksmith. Ethan stared at her back, trying to process this. You never mentioned that in your letter. You never mentioned you were bankrupt in yours. She turned to face him. So here we are. Two liars standing in a dying house, arguing over who deceived whom more thoroughly. Despite everything, Ethan almost smiled. There was something darkly funny about it, in a way that made him want to either laugh or put his fist through the wall. That about sums it up. Then let's stop lying. Lydia walked back to the table, pulled out a chair and sat down. It was the first decisive, settled movement she'd made since arriving. I need shelter and food and some kind of future. You need what? Money? Help? A miracle? All three. Then perhaps we can strike a different bargain than the one we both thought we were making. She looked up at him. I'll stay. Through Christmas, at minimum. Help however I can. In exchange, you tell me the truth about everything. The debt, the foreclosure, all of it. No more lies. And after Christmas, we see if there's anything left to save. Her expression was pragmatic, almost cold. If there's not, at least I'll have bought myself time to make other plans. And you'll have company, I suppose, for the end. It was the bleakest offer of partnership Ethan had ever heard. It was also the only honest conversation he'd had in months. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. All right, truth. What do you want to know? Everything. So he told her, all of it. The drought that had started 2 summers ago and never really ended. The failed crops, the dying wells, the cattle he'd had to sell at a loss because there was no water to sustain them. His father's death 18 months back, and the discovery that the old man had taken out loans Ethan had never known about, trying to keep the ranch going. The desperate scramble through this year, selling everything, working himself to exhaustion, watching the debt grow faster than he could fight it. I went to Garrett 3 weeks ago, Ethan said. The buyer, practically begged him for a loan. He laughed at me, said he'd buy the whole place for $1,000 when the bank seized it. Said I should save myself the trouble and sell to him now for $1,200. You didn't. No, probably should have. At least then I'd have something. He rubbed his face, suddenly exhausted. Instead, I placed that advertisement and convinced myself that somehow bringing a wife into this mess would make it better. Like I said, desperate and stupid. Lydia was quiet for a moment, her fingers tracing the rim of her coffee cup. $3,000 in 9 days. 47 and change, but yes. No way to raise it? I've tried everything. Bank won't extend the loan. No one will buy land in the middle of winter, especially land everyone knows is foreclosed. I've worked every job I could find, but he shook his head. It's not enough. It's not close to enough. Full dark had fallen outside. The single lamp on the table cast shadows into the corners of the room. Somewhere in the house something creaked, the sound of old wood adjusting to the cold. Show me the forge, Lydia said suddenly. Ethan blinked. What? The forge. You must have one. Every ranch does, for repairs and horseshoes. She stood up. Show me. It's dark out and freezing. I've worked in worse. She was already moving toward the door, reaching for her coat. You said no more lies, Mr. Hale. That includes no more hiding. Show me everything. He didn't understand what she was looking for, but he got his own coat and lit a lantern. They walked out into the bitter night, across the yard to the barn. The wind had picked up even more, carrying the smell of snow that still wouldn't fall. The barn was in worse shape than the house. Ethan led her past the empty stalls, ghosts of horses and cattle that were gone, to the back corner where the old forge stood. His father had built it 30 years ago, had used it for all the metalwork the ranch needed. Ethan had never had the skill for it, had always meant to learn, but never found the time. Now it sat cold and abandoned, tools rusting, bellows gathering dust. Lydia set her lamp down and moved around the space like she was conducting an inventory. She tested the bellows. They wheezed, but still worked. Examined the anvil, the hammers, the tongs. Opened the coal bin and found it still half full. "When was this last used?" she asked. "Year and a half ago, maybe. My father was the smith. I do basic repairs, but nothing skilled." She nodded, not looking at him, her attention focused on the forge. "The tools are good quality. Neglected, but salvageable. The coal is old, but usable. The structure is sound." She turned to face him. "This could work." What could work? A forge, a working smithy. There was something in her voice now, something that hadn't been there before. Energy, purpose. "You need money. I need work. This gives us both." Ethan stared at her. "You can't seriously think we could make $3,000 in 9 days selling horseshoes. Not horseshoes, custom work. Decorative iron, tools, specialty pieces." She was already planning, he could see it in her face. "Before the panic, I did commissioned work in Philadelphia. Fireplace screens, gates, weather vanes. Rich people pay premium prices for quality metalwork. We're not in Philadelphia. We're in the middle of nowhere, and it's 5 days before Christmas. Who's going to buy custom ironwork?" "I don't know yet." She met his eyes. "But it's a chance, which is more than you had an hour ago." He wanted to tell her it was crazy, that there was no way, no time, that she was grasping at smoke. But standing there in the cold barn, looking at this woman who'd traveled across the country on a lie and was now trying to forge something real from the wreckage, he found he couldn't say any of those things. "All right," he said. "We try. No more lies?" "No more lies." Lydia nodded once, sharp and satisfied, then turned back to the forge. "I'll need this cleaned and operational by tomorrow. Good quality iron stock if you have any, and I'll need you to trust me. I brought you here on a lie and told you we're losing everything." Trust might be asking a lot. She looked at him over her shoulder, and for the first time since she'd stepped off that stagecoach, he saw something that might have been the beginning of a smile. It wasn't warm, wasn't friendly, but it was real. "Then we're even," she said, "and we'll have to build it from scratch." They walked back to the house through the darkness, the wind pushing at their backs. Inside, Ethan put together a simple supper: bread, cheese, some dried meat, the last of the vegetables from the root cellar. They ate in silence, exhausted from travel and confession both. When Lydia finally went upstairs to her room, Ethan sat alone at the table for a long time, looking at the foreclosure notice he'd left lying there. 9 days. A broken forge. A woman who worked metal and wore her hardships like armor. The impossible mathematics of debt and desperation. It was crazy. It wouldn't work. There was no rational reason to believe any of this would make a difference. But for the first time in months, sitting in his cold house with a stranger upstairs and a deadline hanging over his head, Ethan Hale felt something he'd almost forgotten. Hope. Dawn came cold and gray, the kind of morning that made a man question whether the sun had given up entirely. Ethan woke to a sound he couldn't immediately place, rhythmic, metallic, coming from somewhere outside. He lay in bed for a moment, disoriented, before memory crashed back. Lydia. The forge. The confession. The sound came again, metal striking metal. He dressed quickly, didn't bother with breakfast, and walked out into the freezing air. The sky was the color of old iron, clouds pressed low enough to touch. His breath came out in thick plumes as he crossed the yard toward the barn. The forge was already lit. Ethan stopped in the doorway, stunned. Inside, Lydia stood at the anvil in a heavy leather apron that must have been his father's, her sleeves rolled up despite the cold, hammer in hand. The fire in the forge glowed orange, casting her shadow huge against the barn wall. She was working a piece of iron, heating it, hammering it, heating it again. The movements were precise, controlled, each strike deliberate. She'd been up for hours. He could tell from the work already done. The forge clean, tools organized, the space transformed from abandoned corner to working shop. Coal dust covered her hands and streaked her face. Her hair had come loose from its pins and hung in dark strands around her shoulders. She looked up as he approached, didn't stop working. "There's coffee in the pot by the door. I made it an hour ago, so it's probably bitter. When did you wake up?" 4. She plunged the iron into the water barrel, steam hissing up. Couldn't sleep. Decided to be productive instead. Ethan poured himself a cup of the coffee. It was bitter, thick enough to stand a spoon in, and the best thing he'd tasted in days. "You cleaned all this?" "It needed doing." She pulled the iron from the water, examined it critically, then set it aside and reached for another piece of stock. "I found decent iron in the storage room. Not much, but enough to start. The tools needed sharpening. I did what I could. The bellows needed patching. That took longest." He watched her work, fascinated despite himself. There was something almost hypnotic about it, the way she moved through the process. Heat, hammer, cool, each step flowing into the next like a dance she'd done 1,000 times. "What are you making?" he asked. "Practice pieces. I haven't worked in 3 months. Need to get my hand back." She didn't look up from the iron. "Also assessing what's possible with the materials you have. Iron quality, coal heat, how the forge responds." "And?" "It'll do." She struck the iron again, sparks flying. "The forge runs hot once it's properly stoked. The anvil has good resonance. Your father kept quality tools, even if he let them rust." Another strike. "I can work with this." Ethan set down his coffee cup. "Tell me what you need." That made her pause. She lowered the hammer, looked at him directly for the first time that morning. "Why?" "Because you were right last night. It's a chance. Only one we've got." Something shifted in her expression, too quick to read. She nodded once. "Then I need information. What's the nearest town with money? Not your local general store, somewhere with wealthy buyers." "Silverton, 40 miles north, mining town, new money, people building big houses. Or Denver, but that's near 100 miles. "Silverton, then. Time matters." She was already thinking. He could see the calculation in her eyes. "I need to know what they want. Mining towns need tools, but they also need status. Men with new money want to prove they're civilized, that they're not just roughnecks with silver in their pockets." "You planning to ride up there and ask them?" "I'm planning to make pieces good enough they'll pay premium prices, then figure out how to get those pieces in front of buyers." She turned back to the forge, pumped the bellows. "But first I need to work, and you need to let me." It was a dismissal. Ethan recognized it and found he didn't mind. He'd spent so many months doing everything himself, failing at everything himself, that there was something almost relieving about being told to step back. "I'll handle the ranch work," he said. "You do this." "One more thing." She didn't turn around. "That buyer you mentioned, Garrett, when's he coming back?" The question made Ethan's stomach tighten. "Don't know. He shows up when he feels like it, usually once a week. Likes to watch things fall apart. When he comes next, I want to meet him." "Why?" "Because I want to see what we're up against." She struck the iron again, the sound ringing through the barn. "And I want him to see me." Ethan didn't fully understand, but he nodded and left her to it. The rest of the morning passed in strange domesticity. Him doing the necessary work of keeping a dying ranch minimally functional, her turning the forge into something that roared and breathed like a living thing. He could hear her working as he repaired a fence line, as he hauled firewood, as he tried to fix a leak in the barn roof that he'd been ignoring for weeks. The sound of the hammer was steady, relentless. She didn't stop. Around noon, he brought her food, bread and butter, a jar of pickles, water. She ate standing up, barely pausing in her work. Her hands were blistered, he noticed, fresh blisters on top of old calluses. "You should rest," he said. "Can't afford to." She took another bite of bread. "Need to have something finished by tomorrow." "Tomorrow? That's impossible." "Then I'll do the impossible." There was no bravado in it, just statement of fact. Eat, work, sleep 2 hours, repeat. That's how you meet deadlines when the world's on fire. He thought about arguing, but the set of her jaw told him it would be pointless. Instead, he went back to his own work, trying not to think about the calendar ticking down. 7 days left. 8 if he counted Christmas Day, but banks didn't care about Christmas. Evening came early, the way it did in December. Ethan finished his work and went to check on the horses. Only 2 left, both old, when he heard a wagon coming up the road. He tensed. Garrett drove a wagon, but it was too early in the week. The wagon came into view. Not Garrett, Thomas Morrison, who ran the general store in town. Ethan relaxed slightly and walked out to meet him. "Morrison, didn't expect to see you out here." Thomas climbed down, a lean man in his 50s with a practical face. "Heard you had someone come in on the stagecoach Tuesday. Collins mentioned it. Thought I'd check if you needed supplies." It was a kindness disguised as business. Thomas knew the ranch was failing, knew Ethan had no money for supplies, but he'd made the 8-mile drive anyway. "Appreciate it," Ethan said, "but I'm not buying today." "Not selling, just visiting." Thomas glanced toward the barn, where the sound of hammering still echoed. "That your new wife working?" Ethan felt heat rise in his face. "Not exactly. It's complicated." "Life usually is." Thomas pulled a wrapped package from the wagon. "Brought some coffee and sugar anyway. Consider it a Christmas gift. No arguments." "Thomas, no arguments," I said. The older man's face was stern. "You've been a good customer for years, Ethan. Your father was a friend. I can spare a few supplies." He thrust the package into Ethan's hands. "Besides, word is you might lose this place. I'd rather help while you're still here than feel guilty after you're gone." The bluntness of it stung, but Ethan took the package. "Thank you." They stood there awkwardly for a moment, the sound of the forge filling the silence. Finally, Thomas said, "She any good? The smith?" "I think so. Haven't seen the finished work yet." "Well," Thomas climbed back onto his wagon. "If she needs anything from town, supplies, information, whatever, you send word. And Ethan, don't give up yet. I've seen men come back from worse than debt." He drove away before Ethan could respond. The package felt heavy in his hands, heavier than coffee and sugar had any right to feel. It was the weight of kindness when you didn't deserve it, of community that persisted even when everything was falling apart. He took the supplies inside, then returned to the barn. Lydia was still working, but she'd moved on to a different piece now, something longer, more complex. In the firelight, her face was streaked with soot and exhaustion, but her hands were steady. "That was Morrison from town," Ethan said. "Brought supplies, coffee, and sugar." She nodded without stopping her work. "Kind of him." "He asked about you, about the smithing." "What did you tell him?" "That I hadn't seen the finished work yet." He moved closer, trying to see what she was making. "Have you?" Lydia set down her hammer, wiped her forehead with the back of her hand. "Come here." She led him to a workbench he hadn't noticed before, covered with a piece of canvas. She pulled the canvas back. 3 pieces lay there, still rough but already showing promise. A set of fireplace tools, poker, tongs, brush, the handles wrapped in a spiral pattern that caught the light. A door latch with decorative scrollwork, and a small decorative hook, the metal twisted into the shape of a vine with leaves. They were beautiful, simple, functional, but beautiful in a way that transcended mere utility. "You made all this today?" Ethan breathed. "Just the basics. They need finishing, polishing, final details." She touched the fireplace tools lightly. "But yes, this is what I can do with decent iron and a working forge. People will pay for this. People with money will pay well for this." She covered the pieces again. "But I need to make more. Better pieces. Things that prove I'm not just competent, but exceptional." Her voice was matter-of-fact, not boastful. "That takes time I don't have, which means I need to work faster than I've ever worked. You can't keep this pace. You'll collapse." "Maybe." She picked up her hammer again. "But not before I'm done." He wanted to argue, but he recognized the futility. Instead, he said, "I'll make dinner, something warm. You'll eat it, even if I have to force-feed you." That earned him something that might have been a smile. "Yes, sir." The night settled in, temperature dropping toward zero. Ethan made stew from the last of the meat and vegetables, thick and heavy, the kind of food that kept a person working in the cold. He brought a bowl out to Lydia, made her sit down and eat it. She did mechanically, her mind clearly still on the work. "Tell me about Philadelphia," he said, just to break the silence. She looked up, surprised. "Why?" "Because I lied to you about everything, but you've barely told me anything about yourself. Seems uneven." Lydia ate another spoonful of stew, considering. "Not much to tell. My mother died when I was young. My father raised me in his shop. He had no sons, no apprentices he trusted, so he taught me. People thought it was strange, but he didn't care. Said skill was skill, regardless of who had it." "Sounds like a good man." "He was." Her voice went quiet. "He was also stubborn and proud. When the business started failing, he took out loans rather than ask for help. Kept thinking he could fix it himself. By the time he died, the debt was insurmountable. Like father, like daughter." She looked at him sharply, then realized he was talking about himself. "I suppose we're both our parents' children, for better and worse." They finished eating in silence. Ethan took the bowls inside, washed them, banked the fire in the stove. When he came back out, Lydia was at the forge again, working by lamplight and fireglow. He almost told her to stop, to rest, but he didn't. He recognized that kind of determination. It was the same thing that had kept him trying long after trying was rational. He went to bed to the sound of her hammer. It followed him into sleep, a rhythm like a heartbeat, steady and relentless. The next day followed the same pattern. Ethan worked the ranch, Lydia worked the forge. He brought her food, water, watched her create pieces that seemed impossible. A candle holder with intricate scrolling, a set of hinges that looked like twisted rope, small decorative pieces that packed beauty into compact forms. By evening, she had a dozen finished pieces. Not perfect, she kept muttering about flaws only she could see, but far better than anything Ethan had expected. "We need to price these," she said as they examined the work, "and we need to find buyers fast. Christmas is in 4 days. Most people have already done their shopping. Then we target people buying last-minute gifts, wealthy people who forgot someone or want to show off." She was calculating again, that sharp intelligence working through problems. "We need to get these to Silverton, tomorrow if possible. That's a full day's ride, longer with a loaded wagon. Then we leave before dawn." She met his eyes. "Both of us. I need to see the buyers, understand what they want. You know the territory, the people. We go together." Ethan started to object. Someone needed to watch the ranch, but realized there was nothing left to watch. Everything valuable was already gone. What remained was just buildings and land that would belong to the bank in 6 days. "All right," he said. "We go tomorrow." That night, he lay awake long after Lydia finally stopped working. The house was silent except for the wind and the creaks of old wood. Somewhere above him, in his sister's old room, Lydia was sleeping, or trying to. He wondered if she was as scared as he was, if she lay awake doing the same impossible math he'd been doing for months. $3,000. 12 pieces of decorative ironwork, 6 days. The arithmetic was still brutal, still impossible, but at least now there was action, movement, something besides passive waiting for the end. He must have slept eventually because the next thing he knew, someone was shaking his shoulder. He jerked awake to find Lydia standing over him, already dressed, a lamp in her hand. "It's 4 o'clock, she said. "We need to load the wagon." They worked in the dark, wrapping each piece carefully in canvas and straw, loading them into the wagon bed. The pieces clinked softly against each other despite the padding. Each sound felt like a small bet placed, a gamble made with metal and hope. The sky was just beginning to lighten when they finally set out, 2 horses pulling the loaded wagon, heading north toward Silverton. The temperature was bitter, the wind cutting. Ethan had loaded extra blankets, what little food they had. It would be a hard journey. They'd been riding for an hour when Lydia spoke. What if this doesn't work? It was the first time she'd acknowledged doubt. Ethan considered lying, offering false comfort, but they'd promised honesty. "Then we lose everything, and you'll have wasted 3 days working yourself to exhaustion for nothing. That's not comforting." "You asked for truth, not comfort." She was quiet for a moment, then, "Fair enough." The landscape rolled past, empty and cold. Grasslands covered in frost, the occasional stand of trees skeletal against the pale sky. They passed abandoned homesteads, failed dreams just like theirs. The frontier was full of them, people who'd believed in something, worked themselves to exhaustion, and lost anyway. "Tell me about Garrett," Lydia said as morning brightened around them. "The buyer. What kind of man is he?" Ethan's hands tightened on the reins. "Rich, ruthless. Came out here 10 years ago with Eastern money and bought up half the failed ranches in the territory. Now he controls more land than anyone except the territorial government. So he's built an empire on other people's failures. That's one way to put it. And he wants your ranch specifically? He wants everything. Has this vision of consolidating all the small holdings into one massive property. Says it's more efficient, more modern." Ethan spat into the dirt. "What he means is, it gives him control, water rights, grazing rights, everything. Small ranchers like me, like my father was, were just obstacles to his grand design." Lydia was quiet, absorbing this. "When he comes to the ranch next, I want you to let me handle him. That's not— I'm serious." She turned to look at him. "You're angry at him. I can hear it in your voice. That anger makes you vulnerable, gives him leverage. I don't have that anger. I can be cold, calculating. Let me negotiate." "Negotiate what? We're not selling to him." "No, but he doesn't need to know that yet." Something in her voice made Ethan look at her more closely. She was staring ahead at the road, but her mind was clearly elsewhere, working through strategies. "Let him think we're considering his offer. Let him get confident. Meanwhile, we work on the actual solution." "You're talking about playing games with a man who's made a fortune destroying people like us." "I'm talking about buying time and keeping our options open." She pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "But only if you trust me." There was that word again, trust. It seemed impossible that just 3 days ago, this woman had been a stranger stepping off a stagecoach. Now she was asking him to trust her with negotiations that could determine whether he lost everything. But what choice did he have? His way had been failing spectacularly for months. "All right," he said. "When Garrett comes, you handle him." They rode on through the morning, the cold seeping through layers of clothing. Around noon, they stopped to rest the horses and eat the food Ethan had packed. Bread and cheese, apples that were starting to go soft. They ate quickly, neither wanting to lose time. "How much further?" Lydia asked. "Another 4 hours, maybe. Depends on the roads." She nodded, already climbing back onto the wagon. Her hands, he noticed, were still blistered from the forge work. She'd wrapped them in cloth, but blood was seeping through in places. She saw him looking and pulled her gloves on quickly. "I'm fine," she said before he could ask. "You're bleeding." "Blisters are part of the work. I've had worse." They continued north. The landscape began to change, becoming more rugged, hills rising around them. In the distance, mountains loomed, snow-covered peaks catching the afternoon light. This was mining country, where men dug fortunes out of the earth and built cities overnight. Silverton appeared in the late afternoon, a sprawl of buildings climbing up the mountainside. Even from a distance, Ethan could see the wealth, new construction, fresh paint, wide streets. Money flowed through this town like water, silver money pulled from the mines that honeycombed the surrounding peaks. They drove through the main street slowly, Lydia taking it all in. Silverton was nothing like the dying ranch, nothing like the small struggling town where Ethan bought supplies. This was prosperity, raw and unrefined but undeniable. The buildings were new but built to look permanent, as if the people here believed the silver would never run out. "Where do the wealthy people shop?" Lydia asked. "Henderson's Mercantile, far end of the main street. It's where the mine owners' wives buy their fancy goods." "Then that's where we start." Ethan pulled the wagon up in front of Henderson's, a large storefront with plate glass windows displaying imported goods. Through the windows, he could see expensive furnishings, delicate china, things that had no business existing in a frontier mining town but did anyway because money made all things possible. They climbed down from the wagon. Lydia straightened her dress, still her traveling dress, mended but presentable, and smoothed her hair. The transformation was subtle but noticeable. She stood differently, held herself with a kind of dignity that made the shabby clothing seem irrelevant. "Let me do the talking," she said quietly. Inside, the store was warm and bright, heated by a modern stove and lit by multiple lamps. A woman stood behind the counter, middle-aged and well-dressed, looking at them with the particular expression shopkeepers reserved for customers they suspected couldn't afford anything. "Can I help you?" The tone was polite but cool. Lydia smiled, a small, controlled expression. "I hope so. My name is Lydia Brooks. I'm a metalsmith, recently arrived from Philadelphia. I've brought some pieces I thought might interest your clientele. Decorative ironwork, custom pieces suitable for gifting." The woman's expression didn't change much, but Ethan saw the slight interest in her eyes. Philadelphia meant quality, meant Eastern sophistication. "We generally work with established suppliers." "Of course. I'm not asking to replace your suppliers, but it is the Christmas season, and I thought perhaps you might have customers looking for something unique, something not available in every store in the territory." Lydia's voice was pleasant, professional, nothing desperate in it. "Might I show you a few pieces?" The woman hesitated, then nodded. "I suppose it wouldn't hurt to look." Ethan went back to the wagon and carefully unloaded 3 pieces: the fireplace tools, the candle holder, and a small decorative wall hook. He brought them inside, and Lydia unwrapped them on the counter. The metalwork gleamed in the lamplight. Even here, surrounded by expensive goods, they stood out. The woman picked up the candle holder, turned it slowly, examining the detail work. "You made this yourself?" she asked. "I did, in my forge, using traditional techniques I learned from my father." Lydia didn't elaborate, let the work speak for itself. "It's quite good." The woman set it down carefully. "But I'd need to know your prices before—" "Mrs. Henderson?" A new voice interrupted. Ethan turned to see a tall man entering from a back room, well-dressed in a suit that probably cost more than Ethan made in a month. "I heard you had—" He stopped, seeing the pieces on the counter. "What's this?" "New metalsmith, Mr. Caldwell. Just arrived in town, apparently." Caldwell moved closer, picked up the fireplace tools, tested the weight. "These are exceptional. Where did you train?" "Philadelphia, under my father, who trained under a master smith in Germany." "And you're working here, in Silverton?" He seemed genuinely surprised. "My circumstances brought me to the territory. My skill came with me." Lydia's tone remained even. "I'm establishing a new forge and looking to connect with buyers who appreciate quality work." Caldwell set down the tools carefully. "I'm building a new house, large place, up on the hill. I've been looking for custom ironwork, gates, railings, interior pieces. Everything I've seen has been either too crude or shipped in from Denver at outrageous prices." He looked at Lydia directly. "Could you handle a commission, something substantial?" Ethan felt his heart jump, but Lydia's expression didn't change. "That would depend on the scope and timeline. I work alone currently, which limits production capacity. But for the right project, I could certainly make accommodations." "Come see the house. Tomorrow morning, we'll discuss specifics." Caldwell pulled out a card, handed it to her. "In the meantime, I'll take the candle holder and the wall hook. For gifts." "How much?" $20 for the candle holder, $8 for the hook." It was a fortune. Ethan tried to keep his face neutral. $28 for 2 small pieces. That was more than he'd made in the last month combined. Caldwell didn't even blink. "Done. Mrs. Henderson, put it on my account." The transaction was completed quickly, businesslike. Caldwell left with his purchases, and Mrs. Henderson was suddenly much more interested. "If you have more pieces, I might be able to sell them here on consignment," she said. "I take 20%, but my customers have money and they like quality." "I'll consider it." Lydia was already wrapping the remaining piece. "For now, I need to focus on building inventory, but I'll be in touch." They left the store with $28 and a commission meeting scheduled. Ethan didn't speak until they were back at the wagon. $28 for 2 pieces. It's a start. Lydia climbed onto the wagon seat, pulled out the card Caldwell had given her. "And if the commission is as substantial as he suggested, it could be much more. But the timeline, we have 6 days. Even if he commissions work today, you can't complete a major project in 6 days." "No, but I can complete a down payment's worth of work." She looked at him. "Caldwell is building a house. That means he's spending thousands, maybe tens of thousands. If I can secure a commission for, say, $500 of work, He'll likely pay a deposit up front. 200, maybe 250. Ethan's mind was racing, doing the math. We'd still need more. Much more. Which is why we're not stopping here. She pulled the blanket around her shoulders as evening cold settled in. We visit every wealthy buyer in this town. We make contacts. We sell everything I made. And tomorrow morning, I negotiate with Caldwell while you visit the other mine owners. You want to split up? We're racing the calendar, Ethan. We can't afford to be polite about it. Her face was determined, exhausted, but absolutely focused. Tonight we find a place to sleep. Tomorrow we work this town until there's nothing left to sell. They found a boarding house that took most of their new money but provided hot food and clean beds. Ethan lay awake that night, listening to the sounds of Silverton through the thin walls. Laughter, conversation, the sounds of a town that didn't know how to stop. Somewhere in the building, Lydia was sleeping, or not sleeping, working through plans and calculations the way she'd worked iron. 5 days left. $28 earned, nearly $3,000 still needed. The mathematics were still impossible, but they were slightly less impossible than they'd been yesterday. It was something. It had to be enough to keep going. Morning came too early, pale winter light filtering through the boarding house window. Ethan woke to find Lydia already dressed, sitting at the small table in the corner of her room with the door open, writing something by lamplight. She'd borrowed paper from somewhere, was making lists in careful handwriting. "What time is it?" he asked, his voice rough with sleep. 5:30. "We should eat and split up by 6. She didn't look up from her writing. "I have the meeting with Caldwell at 8. That gives you 2 hours to visit as many mine offices as you can." "And say what exactly?" "That you represent a metalsmith of exceptional skill, recently arrived from Philadelphia, available for custom commissions. Be specific about the quality. Mention the German training. Don't mention the timeline." She tore off a page, handed it to him. "Here are the names of the 3 largest mine operations in Silverton. Start with them." Ethan looked at the list. "How do you know these names?" "I talked to Mrs. Henderson yesterday while you were loading the wagon. She was quite informative once I bought something." Lydia stood, folded her other papers carefully. "The mining operations are competitive. If one owner commissions custom work for his house, the others will want the same. We need to create that competition." "You're talking about manipulating people." "I'm talking about business." Her voice was matter of fact. "These are men who've made fortunes manipulating ore prices and labor costs. I'm simply playing the same game, just with ironwork instead of silver." They ate breakfast in the boarding house dining room, a quick meal of eggs and bread that Ethan barely tasted. His stomach was tight with nerves. The idea of walking into mine offices and selling something he didn't understand to men who'd see through him in seconds felt impossible. Lydia must have seen it on his face. "You're not selling the work," she said quietly. "You're selling the story. Eastern craftsmanship coming west, quality that matches their new wealth. Make them feel like they're getting something their neighbors can't have. I'm a rancher, not a salesman. You placed an advertisement for a wife and convinced me to travel across the country. You can convince a mine owner to commission metalwork." She finished her coffee, stood. "We meet back here at noon, compare notes, adjust strategy." They separated outside the boarding house, Lydia heading toward the address on Caldwell's card, Ethan toward the mine offices on the edge of town. The morning was brutally cold, frost covering everything, the air so sharp it hurt to breathe. Around him, Silverton was waking up. Miners heading to work, shop owners opening their doors, the whole machinery of a wealthy town grinding into motion. The first mine office was a squat building near the largest shaft entrance. Ethan stood outside for a full minute, trying to gather courage, before finally walking in. A clerk sat behind a desk, young and officious. "Can I help you?" "I'm here to speak with the owner about a business opportunity." "Mr. Patterson doesn't see people without appointments. Tell him it's about custom metalwork for his home from a Philadelphia-trained smith." Ethan tried to sound confident. "He'll want to hear this." The clerk looked skeptical, but disappeared into a back room. Ethan waited, his heart pounding. This was insane. He didn't know what he was doing. Lydia should be handling this, not him. The clerk returned. "Mr. Patterson will give you 5 minutes." The office was lavish in a way that didn't quite work. Expensive furniture that clashed with the rough wooden walls, a crystal chandelier that seemed absurd in a mining building. Patterson sat behind a massive desk, a thick man in his 40s with shrewd eyes. "You have 5 minutes," he said. "Use them wisely." Ethan took a breath and launched into the pitch Lydia had outlined, stumbling over some of it but hitting the key points. Philadelphia training, German techniques, quality ironwork, custom pieces that would set Patterson's home apart from every other wealthy residence in Silverton. Patterson listened without interrupting, his face unreadable. When Ethan finished, there was a long silence. "You're not a salesman," Patterson said finally. "No, sir. You're a rancher. I can tell by your hands, your clothes, the way you stand." Patterson leaned back in his chair. "So why are you here selling metalwork?" The honest question deserved an honest answer. "Because I'm desperate. My ranch is failing, and I've got 6 days before the bank forecloses. The smith I'm representing is skilled, the best I've seen, but she needs buyers fast. So I'm here, doing something I don't know how to do, hoping you'll take a chance." Patterson's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. "She?" "Yes, sir. Lydia Brooks. Trained by her father, who trained in Germany. She's working out of my ranch currently, but her skill—" He stopped, tried to find words. "I watched her make pieces that looked like they belonged in museums, not on the frontier. She's the real thing. And you're the desperate rancher trying to save his land. That's about the size of it." Patterson drummed his fingers on the desk, thinking. "I'm building a new house. Been looking for someone to do the ironwork, railings, gates, fireplace screens. Everything I've seen has been either trash or priced like gold. Your smith as good as you say?" "Better." "Can she handle a large commission? I'm talking thousands of dollars of work." Ethan's mouth went dry. "How large?" $2,000 for the full project, but I'd need it done by spring." Patterson pulled out a pad of paper, scribbled something. "Here's what I'm willing to do. I'll commission one piece as a test, a fireplace screen for my library. If it meets my standards, we discuss the larger project. I'll pay $200 up front, $200 on delivery. $400. For one piece." Ethan tried to keep his hands from shaking as he took the paper Patterson offered. "She'll need details," Ethan said. "Dimensions, style preferences. Tell her to come by tomorrow morning. We'll discuss specifics." Patterson stood, extending his hand. "And Mr. Hale? I appreciate the honesty. Most men would have lied about their circumstances." Ethan shook his hand and left before his luck could run out. Outside, he leaned against the building, breathing hard. $400. It was more than he dared hope for. It was also still nowhere near enough. He visited 2 more mine offices that morning. One owner wasn't interested, barely gave him 2 minutes. The other was intrigued, but wanted to see finished work before committing to anything. Ethan left his information and headed back to the boarding house. Lydia was already there, waiting in the dining room with a cup of tea she wasn't drinking. She looked up as he entered, her expression controlled but tense. "How did it go?" he asked. Caldwell commissioned a full gate and railing system for his entrance. $800, half up front. She said it without inflection, but he could see the relief in her eyes. "How about you?" "Patterson wants a fireplace screen, $400, half up front. And there's potential for a $2,000 project if he likes the test piece." Ethan sat down across from her. "That's $1,200 total, if we get it." "We'll get it." Lydia pulled out her papers, started making notes. "But we need more, much more. What about the other offices?" He told her about the rejections, the maybes. She listened carefully, occasionally asking questions, processing information like she processed iron, methodically, looking for the useful parts. "We need to leverage what we have," she said finally. "Caldwell and Patterson are both prominent. If we let it slip that they've commissioned work, others will follow. Competition and status. Those are our tools now. How do we let it slip without looking like we're bragging? We don't tell them directly. We tell Mrs. Henderson at the Mercantile. She'll spread the word faster than a telegraph." Lydia was already standing. "Come on, we need to visit her now, while the momentum is good." They spent the afternoon working Silverton like a mining claim, methodical and relentless. They visited shops, spoke to business owners, dropped carefully casual mentions of the commissions. Lydia sold 3 more small pieces: a decorative door knocker, a set of cabinet handles, a letter holder. The money added up in small increments: $20 here, $15 there. By evening, they'd collected deposits and sales totaling nearly $800. Combined with what they already had, they'd raised over $1,000. Still $2,000 short. They ate dinner at a restaurant Lydia insisted they couldn't afford but visited anyway. "We need to be seen," she explained. "Need people to remember us, talk about us. Money spent on visibility is money invested." Ethan picked at his food, too anxious to eat properly. "It's December 23rd. We've got 6 days. 5 days now. And we're not counting Christmas. No one conducts business on Christmas." Lydia's voice was calm, but he could see the exhaustion in her face. "So really, we have 4 working days. That's not enough time." "Then we make it enough." She set down her fork, leaned forward. "Listen to me. We've raised over $1,000 in less than 2 days. That's more than you raised in 4 months of trying alone. The strategy is working. But we're selling pieces you've already made. Once those are gone, I make more. Tomorrow night, we head back to the ranch. I work through the night if I have to. We return here the day after Christmas with new pieces and we sell everything." Her eyes were fierce. "We're not giving up when we're this close." Close? They weren't close. They were still impossibly far from the amount they needed, but arguing seemed pointless, so Ethan just nodded. They returned to the boarding house as full dark settled. In the hallway between their rooms, Lydia paused. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For doing this. For trying. You could have given up, taken Garrett's offer, walked away with something instead of risking everything on a desperate plan." She looked at him directly. "Most men would have. Most men didn't lie to bring someone across the country into their mess. No, most men would have just let me arrive and deal with it myself." Something in her expression softened slightly. "You're trying to make it right. That matters." She went into her room before he could respond. Ethan stood in the hallway for a moment, then went to his own room and lay down fully clothed. Sleep felt impossible, but exhaustion pulled him under anyway. He dreamed of numbers, endless columns of debt and payment, arithmetic that never balanced no matter how many times he calculated it. The next morning was Christmas Eve. They rose early again, made one more round of Silverton's wealthy residents. Lydia met with Caldwell to discuss details of his commission, came away with $200 in deposit money and detailed specifications. Ethan returned to Patterson, collected the same. By noon, they'd gathered every possible dollar Silverton had to offer. Final count, $1,463. It was more money than Ethan had seen in his entire life. It was also $1,300 short of what they needed. They loaded the wagon in silence, the reality settling over them like the cold. The return journey to the ranch was quiet, both of them lost in their own calculations. The sky was heavy with clouds that still refused to release snow, the landscape bleak and frozen. Halfway home, they passed a fancy wagon heading toward Silverton. Ethan recognized it immediately, Garrett's wagon, brass fittings gleaming even in the flat winter light. Garrett himself was driving, saw them, and pulled to a stop. He was a handsome man in his 50s, well-dressed, with the kind of confidence that came from never having lost anything important. "Hale," he called out, "heading back from town?" Ethan wanted to keep driving, but Lydia put a hand on his arm. "Stop," she said quietly. He pulled the wagon to a halt. Garrett climbed down from his seat, walked over with easy assurance. His eyes went to Lydia, curious and appraising. "This must be the new wife," he said. "Garrett's my name. I've been doing business with your husband." "Lydia Brooks." "Mite." She didn't correct him about the wife part. "Mr. Hale mentioned you." "Did he now?" Garrett's smile was pleasant, predatory. "And what exactly did he mention?" "That you've made a generous offer for the ranch." Lydia's tone was neutral, giving nothing away. "We've been discussing it." Ethan felt his jaw tighten, but kept silent. This was her play, whatever she was doing. Garrett's interest sharpened. "Is that so? Because last time we spoke, Hale here seemed pretty set against selling." "Circumstances change." Lydia looked at Garrett with that same careful assessment she'd used on Ethan the first day. "We've been in Silverton, exploring options. It's made us reconsider our position. What kind of options? Various business opportunities. My background is in metalwork. I'm a trained smith. We've been discussing whether it makes more sense to pursue that trade or accept your offer for the property. It was masterful, the way she played it, suggesting they had choices, that Garrett's offer was just one of several possibilities, making him work for it. Garrett studied her, clearly reassessing. You're a blacksmith? I am. And you think you can make more money hammering iron than selling me 300 acres? I think we need to evaluate all our options carefully before making a decision that affects our future. Lydia's voice remained calm. Mr. Hale tells me your offer was $1,200. That's right. We'd need $1,400 to consider it seriously. Ethan almost spoke, almost protested, but Lydia's hand tightened slightly on his arm. Garrett laughed. You've got nerve, I'll give you that. Property's worth less every day. Hale can't pay his mortgage. Why would I go up? Because we have other options now, and because you want the land badly enough that you've been circling for months. Lydia tilted her head slightly. 1,400, Mr. Garrett. That's our number. Think about it. She nodded to Ethan. He snapped the reins, got the wagon moving before Garrett could respond. They drove away, leaving him standing in the road. Once they were out of earshot, Ethan finally spoke. What the hell was that? Leverage. Lydia was looking straight ahead. He thinks we're considering his offer. That makes him nervous. Nervous people make mistakes. We're not actually considering selling to him. Of course not, but he doesn't know that. She glanced at him. Did you see his face when I mentioned 1,400? He's thinking about it. And while he's thinking, we're working. You're playing a dangerous game. We're already playing a dangerous game. I'm just adding more pieces to the board. She pulled the blanket tighter around herself. Trust me. There was that word again. Ethan focused on driving, didn't answer. They reached the ranch as evening was falling. The place looked even more desolate after 2 days in prosperous Silverton, the sagging barn, the worn house, the empty fields. This was what they were fighting for, this collection of broken buildings and exhausted land. Lydia climbed down from the wagon and went straight to the barn without a word. 5 minutes later, Ethan heard the forge roaring to life. He unloaded their supplies, fed the horses, made a simple dinner that Lydia ate standing up at the forge, barely pausing in her work. She was making pieces for the commissions now, working from Caldwell's and Patterson's specifications. The work was more complex, more demanding. You need to sleep, Ethan said around midnight. I'll sleep when it's done. Lydia, I've got 4 days to make pieces that should take 2 weeks. She plunged a length of iron into the coals, her face stark in the firelight. I'll sleep when the bank is paid. He knew better than to argue. Instead, he brought her more coal, kept the water barrel filled, tried to make himself useful in small ways. Around 2 a.m, he finally went inside and collapsed into bed. He woke to the sound of the hammer still ringing. Christmas morning came gray and cheerless. There was no celebration, no acknowledgement of the holiday, except that the world around them was quiet. No one worked on Christmas. No business could be conducted. It meant they'd lost a day. Ethan made breakfast, brought it out to the forge. Lydia had worked through the entire night. Her hands were bleeding again, her face hollow with exhaustion, but the pieces taking shape were extraordinary. A section of railing with intricate scrollwork. The beginning of a gate with twisted metal forming elegant patterns. You're going to kill yourself, he said. Probably. She took the food, ate mechanically. But the work will be done first. Is it worth it? Dying for a ranch that's already lost? She looked at him then, really looked at him for the first time that morning. This isn't about the ranch anymore. This is about whether we're the kind of people who quit or the kind who fight. She set down the plate. I've spent my whole life watching people quit when things got hard. My mother quit living when I was 8. My father quit being smart when debt piled up. I quit on myself every time I let someone tell me I couldn't do this work because I was a woman. Her voice was raw. I'm not quitting anymore. Not on this. Not on you. Not on myself. Ethan didn't know what to say to that. He nodded and went back to the house. The day passed slowly, the forced stillness of Christmas making every hour feel longer. Lydia worked without stopping. Ethan tried to help, but mostly just watched her transform raw iron into art through sheer force of will and skill. Evening came. Tomorrow they'd return to Silverton with the finished commission pieces. After that, they had 3 days to raise $1,300. The mathematics were impossible. They'd done everything right, worked harder than should have been humanly possible, and it still wasn't enough. Ethan sat on the porch as darkness fell, looking out at the ranch his family had built. 4 generations of work, ending because he couldn't raise $3,000. The unfairness of it sat bitter in his throat. The barn door opened. Lydia emerged, walking slowly, every movement showing exhaustion. She crossed the yard and sat down beside him on the porch steps. They sat in silence for a long time, watching the stars come out in the frozen sky. "I have an idea," Lydia said finally. "It's desperate, possibly insane, but it might work." "Tell me." "We take everything I've made, the commission pieces, everything else, every single thing of value, and we take it to the territorial market in Denver. It's 50 miles further than Silverton, but it's 10 times the size. More buyers, more money, more opportunity. We don't have time to get to Denver and back before the deadline. We would if we left tonight, right now, pushed straight through." She turned to look at him. "It's December 25th. The deadline is December 29th. That gives us 4 days. 1 day to get there, 2 days to sell everything we possibly can, 1 day to get back. That's insane. The roads at night, in winter, I know, we could freeze, the wagon could break down, the horses could collapse. A dozen things could go wrong." Her voice was steady despite the exhaustion. "But if we stay here, we definitely lose. If we go, we have a chance." Ethan looked at her, this woman who'd arrived on his doorstep less than a week ago, who'd worked herself to bleeding exhaustion for a ranch that wasn't hers, who refused to quit even when quitting was the rational choice. "All right," he said. "We go to Denver." They spent the next hour in frantic preparation, loading the wagon with every piece Lydia had made, packing food and blankets and extra clothing. The commission pieces went in first, carefully wrapped. Those were promised money, deposits already paid. Then everything else, the smaller pieces that might find buyers. Lydia gathered items from the forge, her best tools, lengths of quality iron stock. "If we need to make more pieces in Denver, I can find a forge to rent," she explained. They hitched fresh horses, checked every strap and buckle twice. The night was brutally cold, the kind of cold that could kill if they weren't careful. "Last chance to change your mind," Ethan said as they climbed onto the wagon. "No changing minds. We're committed." Lydia pulled the blankets around them both. "Let's go save a ranch." They pulled out of the yard at midnight on Christmas, heading south through darkness toward Denver and whatever desperate salvation they could forge there. The stars were impossibly bright overhead, cold and distant. The wagon creaked and rattled, horses' hooves striking frozen ground in steady rhythm. Behind them, the ranch disappeared into darkness. Ahead, 50 miles of winter night, and then a city that might hold answers or might hold nothing at all. Ethan kept the horses moving at a steady pace, not too fast to exhaust them, not too slow to lose time. Beside him, Lydia sat wrapped in blankets, her eyes closed but her body tense. She wasn't sleeping, just conserving energy. "Tell me about Denver," she said after an hour. "I've never been." "Big, growing fast, more people every month, coming for mining jobs, railroad work, opportunity." Ethan focused on the road, what little he could see of it by starlight. "There's money there. Real money. More than Silverton." "And the market?" "Opens at dawn, runs till dark. Vendors from all over the territory. You can buy anything there. Furniture, livestock, tools, art. There's a section for craft work, specialty goods. That's where we'll set up." If they got there. If they survived the journey. If the cold didn't kill them first. The hours bled together, marked only by the slow movement of stars across the sky. They stopped once to rest the horses, ate cold food, then pressed on. The temperature kept dropping. Ethan lost feeling in his toes, his fingers aching even inside gloves. Beside him, Lydia shivered despite the layers of blankets. He moved closer, sharing warmth, and felt her lean against him slightly. Neither of them spoke about it. Dawn came slowly, gray light spreading across frozen plains. They were making good time, better than Ethan had hoped. The horses were holding up, the wagon intact. Maybe their luck was finally turning. Maybe they actually had a chance. Denver appeared on the horizon around mid-morning, buildings rising from the plains like a promise. Smoke from 1,000 stoves hazed the air. The sound of the city reached them before they entered. Voices, wagons, construction, the noise of commerce and life. They drove through streets already busy despite the early hour, past buildings both permanent and temporary, past people from every corner of the country and beyond. This was the New West, raw and unfinished but vital with possibility. The market sprawled across 6 city blocks, vendor stalls and wagons packed together, selling everything imaginable. Ethan found them a spot in the craftwork section, paying the stall fee with money they couldn't afford to spend. Lydia climbed down from the wagon stiffly, looked around at the competition. Other vendors were setting up. Furniture makers, leather workers, a woman selling quilts, a man with hand-carved tools. "We're better," she said quietly. "Our work is better." "Then let's prove it." They unloaded the wagon, arranged the pieces for maximum visual impact. The metalwork gleamed in the winter sun, each piece a small declaration of skill and artistry. Passers-by started stopping immediately, drawn by the quality. A man examined the fireplace tools, tested the weight. "How much?" $40, Lydia said without hesitation. The man didn't even haggle. He paid and left with them. A woman wanted the decorative wall hooks. Another customer commissioned a custom gate latch. By noon, they'd sold half their inventory and taken 3 commission orders. By evening, everything was gone except the pieces promised to Caldwell and Patterson. Lydia was taking measurements for new commissions, quoting prices, her exhaustion invisible behind professional focus. Ethan counted their money in the wagon, his hands shaking slightly. $1,800. Combined with what they already had, they had over $3,000. They'd done it. They'd actually raised enough. He looked up to tell Lydia, saw her finishing with a customer. She took the man's deposit, thanked him professionally, then turned and met Ethan's eyes across the crowd. He nodded. She understood immediately. Her face went very still, then something broke in her expression. Relief, disbelief, joy, exhaustion all mixed together. They didn't celebrate, didn't cheer or cry or any of the things people did when impossible things became possible. They just stood there in the Denver market as evening fell. 2 people who'd gambled everything and somehow, impossibly, won. "We need to get back," Lydia said finally. "Make the payment before the deadline." "We've got 3 days. We can rest tonight. Start back tomorrow." She shook her head. "We start back now. I don't trust time anymore. We drive through the night again. Get home tomorrow. Pay the bank the day after. No delays, no chances for things to go wrong." She was right. They'd come too far to risk it now. They left Denver as the sun set on December 26th, heading back toward the ranch with a wagon full of hope instead of iron. The journey back felt different, lighter somehow, despite the same cold, the same darkness. They'd done the impossible. They'd forged salvation from desperation and skill and relentless refusal to quit. The ranch appeared at dawn on December 27th, exactly as they'd left it, worn, damaged, dying. But it was theirs. In 2 days it would be theirs free and clear. They unhitched the exhausted horses, stumbled into the house. Ethan collapsed onto the sofa. Lydia made it 3 steps further before sitting down hard on the floor, her back against the wall. "We did it," she said. Her voice was hoarse, barely audible. "We did it," Ethan agreed. They sat there in the cold morning light, too tired to move, too relieved to care. Outside, the wind blew across empty fields. Inside, 2 people who'd been strangers a week ago had just saved everything through mettle and determination and desperate faith in each other. Lydia's eyes closed. Within seconds, she was asleep where she sat. Ethan got up, found a blanket, covered her carefully. Then he sat back down and let his own exhaustion pull him under. They'd won. Against impossible odds, against arithmetic that didn't balance, against time and debt and every rational expectation, they'd won. The ranch was saved. Now they just had to prove it to the bank. They slept through most of the day, the kind of sleep that came from complete physical exhaustion. When Ethan finally woke, the light coming through the windows was wrong, too dim, too angled. He sat up, disoriented, and realized it was late afternoon. He'd lost nearly 12 hours. Lydia was still asleep on the floor where he'd left her, the blanket pulled up to her chin, her face finally peaceful in unconsciousness. Her hands were visible, resting on top of the blanket, wrapped in bandages she must have applied before collapsing. The cloth was spotted with blood in places. Ethan stood quietly, careful not to wake her, and went to the kitchen. His body ached in ways he hadn't known were possible, every muscle protesting movement. He got the stove going, put coffee on, found bread and eggs. Real food, after days of eating whatever they could grab between crises. The money was still in his coat pocket, heavy and impossible. He pulled it out, counted it again just to make sure the numbers were real. $3,218. More than enough to pay the debt, with a small buffer left over. They'd actually done it. The reality of it kept hitting him in waves. A week ago, he'd been standing in frozen mud, holding a foreclosure notice and waiting for a woman who was arriving to a lie. Now that same woman was asleep in his house, and together they'd pulled off something that should have been impossible. He heard movement behind him, turned to see Lydia standing in the doorway. Her hair was loose, falling around her shoulders, and she looked younger somehow, without the severe styling she usually maintained. Also more vulnerable. "What time is it?" she asked, her voice rough. "Almost 5. We slept most of the day." She nodded, moved to the table and sat down carefully, like someone testing whether their body still worked properly. "We should count the money. Make sure we have enough." "Already did. 3,218. So we have it." She said it like she was testing the words, seeing if they felt real. "We actually have it." "We do." Ethan poured 2 cups of coffee, set one in front of her. "Bank opens at 9 tomorrow. We can be there when the doors open, pay it off, get the release papers." Lydia wrapped her hands around the cup, staring into the dark liquid. "And then what?" The question caught him off guard. "What do you mean?" "I mean, after we pay the bank, after the ranch is saved, what happens then?" She looked up at him. "We had an arrangement. I agreed to stay through Christmas, help however I could. Christmas has passed. The crisis is resolved. So what happens now?" Ethan sat down across from her, realizing he hadn't thought past the deadline. All his energy had been focused on survival, on making it to December 29th with enough money. He hadn't considered what came after. "I don't know," he said honestly. "I suppose that depends on what you want." "What I want is irrelevant. What matters is what we agreed to." Her voice was controlled, but he could hear something underneath it. Uncertainty, maybe. Fear. "I came here expecting a partnership and a future. You couldn't provide that then. Can you provide it now?" "The ranch is still damaged, still recovering from 2 years of drought. I've got enough to pay the debt, but not enough to rebuild properly. It'll be hard work, long hours, no guarantees." He met her eyes. "But it's honest work now. No more lies. And you'd be a full partner if that's what you wanted. Equal say in decisions, equal share in whatever profit we eventually make." "And what about the other part of the arrangement?" He knew what she was asking. The advertisement had been for a wife, not just a business partner. They'd been dancing around that reality since she arrived. "I won't hold you to anything," Ethan said carefully. "You came here under false pretenses. I lied about what I was offering. If you want to stay just as a business partner, that's fine. If you want to leave entirely, take half the money and start somewhere else, I won't stop you. You earned it." Lydia was quiet for a long time, her fingers tracing the rim of the coffee cup. Outside, the winter evening was settling in, shadows lengthening across the yard. "I don't want to leave," she said finally. "I don't have anywhere else to go, and more than that, I don't want anywhere else. This place, this work, it's the first thing that's felt right since my father died." She paused. "But I also don't want to be married to someone out of obligation or guilt. I've seen what that looks like. It's worse than being alone." "Then we don't," Ethan said. "We work together. Build the ranch back up. See what develops naturally, without pressure or pretense." He managed a tired smile. "We've already proven we work well together in a crisis. Maybe we can figure out the rest as we go." Something in her expression softened. "That seems reasonable." "Good." He stood, went to check the food cooking on the stove. "Then first thing tomorrow, we go to the bank and end this nightmare. After that, We start figuring out what comes next. They ate dinner in comfortable silence, both too exhausted for much conversation. Afterward, Lydia examined her hands critically, rewrapped the bandages, then announced she was going to sleep in an actual bed for the first time in days. Ethan stayed up a while longer, sitting at the table with the money spread out in front of him. $3,218. It looked like so much and so little at the same time. Enough to save everything, not enough to fix everything. But it was a start. He woke the next morning to pale sunlight and the smell of coffee. Lydia was already up, dressed in her best dress. Still the mended traveling dress, but she'd cleaned it, pressed it as well as she could. She was braiding her hair with quick, efficient movements. "Big day," she said when she saw him. "I want to look presentable when we tell the bank to go to hell." Ethan couldn't help but smile. "That's the plan?" "That's exactly the plan." She finished the braid, pinned it up. "I've been looking forward to this moment for days. I want to savor it." They ate quickly, checked the money 3 more times, then hitched the wagon for the 8-mile journey into town. The morning was cold but clear, the sky that particular blue that only came in deep winter. Everything felt sharp-edged and crystalline, like the world itself was holding its breath. The town appeared small and shabby after Denver, just a collection of buildings along a single main street. But the bank stood prominent on the corner, solid brick construction that was meant to inspire confidence and permanence. Ethan pulled the wagon up in front, set the brake. His hands were shaking slightly. After months of dread, of watching this deadline approach like an avalanche, they were finally here. "Ready?" Lydia asked. "Ready." They walked in together. The bank was warm, heated by a large stove, and quiet except for the scratch of a clerk's pen. Behind the main counter, Ethan could see the bank manager's office, the door currently closed. The clerk looked up. "Can I help you?" "We're here to see Mr. Dawson," Ethan said, "about the Hale Ranch loan." The clerk's expression shifted. Recognition, possibly pity. Everyone in town knew about the foreclosure. "One moment." He disappeared into the back office. Ethan and Lydia stood at the counter, waiting. Ethan could feel his heartbeat in his throat. The clerk returned with Dawson, the bank manager. He was a thin man in his 60s, with wire-rimmed spectacles and the careful neutrality of someone who'd foreclosed on dozens of properties over the years. "Mr. Hale," Dawson said. His eyes went to Lydia, curious. "And this is?" "Lydia Brooks, my business partner." Ethan pulled the envelope of money from his coat. "We're here to pay the loan in full." Dawson's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, maybe. He took the envelope, counted the money methodically. The silence stretched out, broken only by the whisper of bills being sorted. Finally, Dawson looked up. "This is $3,218. "The loan amount is $3,847.52, Ethan said. "We're short." The words hit like a physical blow. Lydia went very still beside him. Ethan felt the world tilt. "What?" His voice came out hoarse. "No, that can't be right." The notice said. The notice stated the principal amount. Dawson pulled out a ledger, opened it to show rows of figures. "Interest has continued to accrue since the notice was issued, at the agreed-upon rate of 8% per annum, calculated daily." His finger traced down the column. "As of this morning, the total amount due is $3,847.52. $629 short. After everything, all the work, the desperate journey to Denver, the sleepless nights and bleeding hands, they were still $600 short." Ethan felt like he was going to be sick. The notice didn't mention, "The loan agreement you signed clearly states that interest continues until full payment is received." Dawson's voice was professional, not unkind, but not sympathetic either. "I'm sorry, Mr. Hale, but these are the terms you agreed to." "We can get the rest," Lydia said suddenly. Her voice was steady, controlled. "We have commission work, more pieces to sell. Give us 3 days. We'll have it." Dawson shook his head. "The foreclosure date is December 29th. That's tomorrow. If full payment isn't received by close of business tomorrow, the property transfers to the bank." "But we have most of it," Ethan heard himself saying. "Surely that counts for something. We're trying—" "I understand this is difficult." Dawson closed the ledger. but the bank has obligations to its depositors. We've already been more than generous with extensions. The terms are clear." He paused. "However, I can hold this payment and apply it to the debt. When the property is sold at auction, any proceeds beyond the loan amount will be returned to you. Combined with this payment, you should see some money back." Auction. The word felt like ash in Ethan's mouth. "When?" "Likely February or March. Gives the buyer time to prepare." The buyer, Garrett. He'd get the ranch for a fraction of its value, probably the same $1,200 he'd offered. And after the bank took its $3,000, Ethan would get back maybe a few $100s. Everything his family had built, reduced to pocket change. "There must be something we can do," Lydia said. She wasn't pleading, wasn't emotional, just stating fact. Some way to extend the deadline, arrange terms. "I'm afraid not. The decision is out of my hands at this point." Dawson pushed the money back across the counter. "I am sorry, Mr. Hale. I know your father. He was a good man, but business is business." They left the bank in silence, the money heavy in Ethan's hands again. Outside, the December sun felt too bright, too cheerful for the moment. People walked past going about their business, completely unaware that Ethan's world had just collapsed for the second time. $600, Lydia said quietly. "We need $600 by tomorrow." We can't make that much in one day. It's impossible." "We've done impossible before." She turned to face him. "The commission work. We can finish the pieces early, ask for the final payments up front. That's $400 at most. We'd still be short. Then we find other buyers. Go back to Silverton, sell everything we own, beg if we have to." Her voice was getting sharper, desperation creeping in. "We don't give up when we're this close." "We're not close, Lydia. We're $600 short with 1 day left. That's not close. That's finished." "So what? You're just giving up? After everything we've done, all the work, you're just going to quit?" "I'm being realistic." Ethan's voice rose despite himself. "We gambled everything and we lost. Sometimes that's how it ends." "Don't you dare." She stepped closer, her eyes fierce. "Don't you dare give up now. Not after I've worked myself bloody for this place. Not after we've—" She stopped, took a breath. "I won't let you quit. It's not your choice." "The hell it isn't. We're partners, remember? Equal say in decisions. And I say we keep fighting." They were attracting attention, people on the street starting to notice the argument. Ethan forced himself to lower his voice. "Fighting with what? We've sold everything. We've exhausted every option." "Then we find new options." Lydia grabbed his arm. "Come on, we're going to the forge." "What? Why?" "Because I'm going to work, and you're going to figure something out. That's what we do." She was already moving toward the wagon. "We work until we can't work anymore, and then we work some more." The ride back to the ranch was silent, tense. Ethan kept running through possibilities in his mind, but every scenario ended the same way. They needed money they didn't have, time they didn't have, options that didn't exist. Lydia went straight to the forge when they arrived, didn't even go inside the house first. Ethan heard her lighting the fire, heard the clang of metal on metal starting up. That relentless refusal to quit, even when quitting was the only rational response. He sat on the porch steps, the envelope of money still in his hands. $3,000, that wasn't enough. The story of his life lately, trying hard, coming close, failing anyway. An hour passed. 2. The sound of the forge was steady, hypnotic. Ethan went inside, made coffee he didn't drink, stared at walls he wouldn't own much longer. Around noon, he heard a wagon coming up the road. He stepped outside, expecting Morrison from the general store, or maybe another neighbor come to offer sympathy. It was Garrett. The man pulled up in his fancy wagon, climbed down with that easy confidence that came from always winning. He saw Ethan on the porch and smiled. "Hale, heard you were at the bank this morning." Word traveled fast in small towns. "Heard it didn't go well." Ethan didn't respond. He didn't trust himself to speak. Garrett walked closer, looked around at the ranch with proprietary interest. "Shame, really. You tried hard. I respect that. But sometimes trying isn't enough. What do you want, Garrett?" "Same thing I've wanted all along, this land." He pulled out a folded paper from his coat. "I'm prepared to make you an offer. Final offer. $1,500 cash today. You sign the deed over to me, and I pay off your debt to the bank tomorrow. You walk away with nothing, but you also don't have a foreclosure on your record. Clean break. It was actually a better offer than Ethan had expected. Garrett could just wait until the auction, buy it for less. But he was offering $1,500 now, presumably because he didn't want to risk another buyer showing up. I need to think about it, Ethan said. You've got until sunset. After that, the offer expires. Garrett tipped his hat. I'll be at the hotel in town. Send word when you decide. He left, and Ethan stood there holding the paper. $1,500. Combined with the $3,000 they already had, minus the bank's debt, he'd end up with about $700. Enough to start over somewhere else, buy a small piece of land, try again. It was more than he'd have if he lost everything to foreclosure. He walked to the barn, found Lydia still working at the forge. She looked up when he entered, saw his face. What happened? Garrett came, made an offer. $1,500 for the deed. He pays off the bank tomorrow. Ethan showed her the paper. It's better than losing everything. Lydia set down her hammer carefully. And you're considering it. I'm being practical. We can't raise $600 by tomorrow. This way we at least walk away with something. We walk away with defeat. She wiped soot from her face. We walk away knowing we were $600 short of winning. Sometimes losing is the best option available. I don't accept that. She moved closer, and he could see the exhaustion in her face, the desperation she was trying to hide. We have until sunset. That's 6 hours. In 6 hours, I can finish the commission pieces. We can ride to Caldwell and Patterson, collect the final payments. That's $400, Lydia. We'd still be $200 short. Then we find $200 more. Somewhere. Somehow. Her voice cracked slightly. I am not giving up when we're this close. Stop saying we're close. We're not close. We're beaten. No. She grabbed his arm. No, you don't get to decide this alone. This is my fight too now. I've bled for this place. I've worked until I couldn't stand. She stopped, and he saw something break in her expression. I've started to believe this could work, that we could make something here. Don't take that away from me. Ethan looked at her. This fierce, stubborn woman who'd appeared in his life a week ago and turned everything upside down. Who'd saved his ranch through sheer force of will and skill. Who was standing in front of him now, asking him to believe in something he'd stopped believing in. All right, he said quietly. We try. 6 more hours. We give it everything we have. Relief flooded her face. Thank you. But Lydia, if we can't do it, if sunset comes and we're still short, I'm taking Garrett's offer. Agreed? She hesitated, then nodded. Agreed. They worked with frantic urgency. Lydia finished the last details on Caldwell's gate sections, polished Patterson's fireplace screen until it gleamed. Ethan hitched fresh horses to the wagon, loaded the pieces carefully. By 2 o'clock, they were racing toward Silverton. The afternoon was clear and cold, perfect conditions for travel. They pushed the horses harder than they should have, desperation overriding caution. Every minute mattered now. Silverton appeared and they went straight to Caldwell's new house on the hill. It was massive, still under construction but already impressive. Caldwell himself was there, overseeing work. Miss Brooks, he said, surprised. I wasn't expecting the pieces until next week. Circumstances require early delivery. Lydia climbed down from the wagon. The work is complete. I'm hoping we can settle the account today. They unloaded the gate sections, set them up for inspection. Caldwell examined them carefully, testing the joints, running his hands over the metalwork. The silence stretched out, agonizing. Finally, he nodded. Exceptional work. Better than I expected, honestly. He looked at Lydia with new respect. You have real talent, Miss Brooks. I'll recommend you to everyone I know. Thank you. About the payment, of course. He pulled out a wallet, counted out bills. $200, as agreed for the balance. Plus, I'm adding a $50 bonus. Work this good deserves recognition. $250. Ethan felt a surge of hope. They were at $3,468 now, just under $400 short. Patterson's house was on the other side of town. They raced there, unloaded the fireplace screen. Patterson inspected it with the same thoroughness, nodded his approval. You've earned the full commission, he said. $200. He paused. And I've decided to move forward with the larger project, the full ironwork for the house. I'd like to hire you exclusively for it, starting in spring. We can discuss terms later, but I'm willing to pay a deposit now to secure your commitment. Say $300? 300 more. Ethan did the math quickly. Combined with Patterson's payment for the screen, that was 500. Added to what they already had, they'd have 3,968. They'd have enough. Barely, but enough. We accept, Lydia said, her voice carefully controlled. Thank you, Mr. Patterson. They left Silverton as the sun was touching the western mountains, racing against the light. The money was secured in Ethan's coat, and for the first time in days, he allowed himself to feel something like hope. We did it, he said. We actually have enough. Lydia didn't respond immediately. When Ethan looked at her, he saw tears on her face, silent and steady. She wasn't sobbing, wasn't making any sound, just crying quietly as the wagon rolled through the winter evening. Hey, he said softly. We won. It's over. I know. She wiped at her face with the back of her hand. I didn't think we could. I kept telling myself we could, kept pushing, but I didn't actually believe it until just now. Ethan reached over, took her hand. She squeezed back hard, and they rode the rest of the way like that, hands clasped, the money safe in his pocket, the sunset painting everything gold. They reached the ranch as full dark was settling. The place looked different somehow, less desolate. Or maybe Ethan was just seeing it differently, knowing it would still be his tomorrow. We need to send word to Garrett, Lydia said as they unhitched the horses. Tell him the offer is declined. First thing in the morning. Right now, I just want to sleep. But neither of them slept right away. They sat in the house drinking coffee, occasionally laughing at nothing in particular, the giddy relief of survival making everything seem slightly unreal. What do we do now? Lydia asked around midnight. After we pay the bank tomorrow, after it's really over? We work, Ethan said. We rebuild. We honor those commissions you took on. We make this place productive again. He looked at her. We build something real. Together. Together. She smiled, the first truly unguarded smile he'd seen from her. I liked the sound of that. They finally went to bed as the clock was striking 1, exhausted but peaceful. Tomorrow, they'd go to the bank. Tomorrow, they'd pay the debt and get the release papers. Tomorrow, they'd start the real work of building a life from the wreckage of the last 2 years. But tonight, they could rest. They'd earned it. Ethan lay in bed, listening to the old house creak and settle, and thought about how 7 days could change everything. 7 days ago, he'd been desperate and alone and lying to a stranger. Now he had a partner, a future, and a ranch that would stay in his family. It wasn't the Christmas he'd expected. It was better. He fell asleep with the knowledge that tomorrow, when the bank doors opened at 9, he'd walk in with enough money to save everything. The nightmare was finally over. Except nightmares, he'd learned by morning, sometimes had one last twist waiting. Ethan woke to pounding on the door, harsh and urgent in the pre-dawn darkness. He jerked upright, disoriented, his heart already racing before his mind fully caught up. The pounding came again, louder. He grabbed his pants, pulled them on as he stumbled downstairs. Through the window, he could see a lantern bobbing in the yard, a horse tied to the porch rail. The pounding came a third time. "I'm coming!" he shouted, fumbling with the door latch. Thomas Morrison stood on the porch, his face grim in the lamplight. Behind him, the sky was just beginning to lighten, that pale gray that came before dawn. "Thomas? What's wrong?" "The bank." Morrison was breathing hard, like he'd ridden fast. "It burned last night. The whole building." The words didn't make sense. Ethan stared at him, trying to process. "What?" Fire started around midnight. By the time anyone noticed, the whole interior was engulfed. They got it out eventually, but the damage... Morrison shook his head. "Everything inside is gone, Ethan. Records, cash reserves, everything." The floor seemed to tilt under Ethan's feet. He gripped the doorframe. "The loan records?" "Gone. All the paper records burned." Morrison's expression was sympathetic but firm. "Dawson's already talking about reconstructing accounts from memory and correspondence, but that'll take weeks, maybe months. And in the meantime, In the meantime, the foreclosure still happens today. Ethan finished the thought, his voice hollow. Even though I have the money to pay it. I'm sorry, I thought you should know as soon as possible. Footsteps on the stairs. Lydia appeared, wrapped in a shawl, her hair loose around her shoulders. What's happening? The bank burned, Ethan said flatly. Last night. All the records are gone. He watched her face go through the same sequence his had. Confusion, comprehension, horror. She sat down hard on the bottom step. Morrison shifted uncomfortably. I should go. I just wanted to warn you. Dawson will probably come out here later today to discuss options. Options? Ethan laughed bitterly. What options? I can't pay a debt that doesn't officially exist anymore. I don't know, son. I'm sorry. Morrison touched his hat. If there's anything I can do, there's nothing anyone can do. But thank you for coming. Morrison left, and Ethan closed the door. He stood there for a moment, his hand still on the latch, trying to make sense of what had just happened. They'd done everything right, worked themselves to exhaustion, raised the money, beaten impossible odds. And now a fire, random chance, cruel timing, had undone it all. This can't be happening, Lydia said quietly. After everything, this can't be how it ends. Ethan turned to look at her. She was still sitting on the stairs, her face pale in the growing light. She looked smaller somehow, defeated in a way she hadn't been even when they were $600 short. Maybe it's a sign, he said. Maybe we were never supposed to save this place. Don't say that. Why not? It's true. We've been fighting fate for a week, and fate keeps pushing back harder. He moved to the window, looked out at the ranch. Maybe Garrett was right. Maybe it's time to accept defeat and move on. No. Lydia stood, and there was steel in her voice despite the exhaustion. No, we have the money. We earned it honestly. That has to count for something. It counts for nothing if there's no official record of the debt. Then we create one. We go to Dawson, we show him the money, we get him to acknowledge. Acknowledge what? That I owe a debt that his records can't prove? That I'm trying to pay something that might not even legally exist anymore? Ethan shook his head. He's a banker. He'll follow procedure. And procedure says without records, there's no debt to pay. Then we fight the procedure. With what? We're not lawyers. We don't have influence or connections. We're just two people trying to save a failing ranch in the middle of nowhere. Lydia crossed the room to stand in front of him. We're two people who raised $3,000 in 1 week through skill and determination. We're two people who didn't quit when everyone said we should. Don't you dare give up now, Ethan Hale. Not after I've... She stopped, her voice catching. Not after we've come this far together. He wanted to believe her, wanted to think there was still a way forward, but he was so tired of fighting, so exhausted from a week of constant crisis and impossible deadlines. What do you suggest? He asked quietly. We go to town. We talk to Dawson. We find out exactly what the situation is before we make any decisions. She was already moving toward the stairs. Get dressed. We're not doing this in our nightclothes. They rode into town as the sun was rising, painting the frozen landscape in shades of gold and pink. Under different circumstances, it might have been beautiful. Today, it just felt like mockery. The bank building stood at the corner of Main Street, and the damage was immediately visible. The exterior walls were still standing, but the windows were blown out, smoke stains streaking up the brick. The smell of burned wood hung thick in the air. A small crowd had gathered, townspeople staring at the ruins with the morbid curiosity that disaster always attracted. Dawson stood in front of the building, talking to the sheriff. He looked like he'd aged 10 years overnight, his face drawn and gray. He saw Ethan and Lydia approaching and excused himself. Mr. Hale. Miss Brooks? His voice was weary. I suppose you've heard. Morrison came to the ranch this morning, Ethan said. Told us everything burned. Not everything. The vault survived. It's fireproof. The cash reserves are safe, and some of the more important documents were inside. But most of the loan records, the ledgers, the correspondence, he gestured at the ruined building. Gone. What about my loan? Ethan asked, even though he already knew the answer. Your file was in the main office. I had it out yesterday, was reviewing it after you left. Dawson rubbed his eyes. It burned with everything else. But you remember the details. The amount, the terms, The deadline. I remember some of it, but memory isn't legally sufficient for a transaction of this size. I'd need documentation, the original loan agreement, payment history, correspondence. Without those, I can't officially process a payment. Lydia stepped forward. But the debt still exists, correct? Just because the record's burned doesn't mean Mr. Hale suddenly doesn't owe the money. Legally, that's complicated. Dawson looked uncomfortable. Without documentation, it's difficult to prove the exact terms of the debt. The amount, the interest rate, the foreclosure date, all of that was in the file. You told us yesterday the total was $3,847.52, Ethan said. We have that amount. We're here to pay it. And I appreciate that, but I can't accept payment on a debt I can't officially verify. Dawson's voice was pained. I'm sorry, but I have to follow bank regulations. I'm already in trouble with the head office over this fire. If I accept payments without proper documentation, I could lose my position. So what happens? Lydia asked. The foreclosure just proceeds as planned? That's the problem. Without the original foreclosure notice, without the loan documents, I can't legally foreclose either. Dawson looked between them. As it stands, there's no official record that Mr. Hale owes this bank anything, which means the property remains in his name until we can reconstruct the documentation. Ethan felt something shift in his chest. How long would that take? Months, possibly. I'd need to contact the head office, search for copies of correspondence, try to rebuild the file from fragments. And even then, there might be disputes about terms, amounts, dates. Dawson hesitated. In theory, you could argue the debt no longer exists. Without documentation, it would be difficult for the bank to prove otherwise. The implication hung in the air. Ethan could walk away right now, claim the debt was erased by the fire, and there would be no legal proof otherwise. The ranch would be his, free and clear, at least until the bank could rebuild its case. It would be dishonest. It would be taking advantage of a disaster, but it would also solve everything. No, Lydia said suddenly. Ethan looked at her, surprised. What? No, we're not doing that. She turned to Dawson. We owe the money. The fire doesn't change that. What do we need to do to pay it properly? Dawson seemed taken aback by the question. Miss Brooks, I'm not sure you understand. This is an opportunity. I understand perfectly. We owe a debt. We have the money to pay it. We're not going to build our future on a technicality that's morally wrong. Her voice was firm. Now, what do we need to do? Ethan stared at her. Lydia, this could save everything. We could keep the money, use it to rebuild, actually have a chance built on dishonesty. She met his eyes. We started this partnership with lies. I won't continue it that way. Either we do this right, or we don't do it at all. Something in her expression reminded Ethan of that first night, when she'd demanded truth instead of pretty lies, when she'd agreed to stay only if he promised no more deception. He'd made that promise, and she was right. They couldn't build anything real on another lie, even a convenient one. All right, he said quietly. We do it right. Dawson looked between them like they were crazy. You're sure? Because once I start the reconstruction process, you're locked in. You can't change your mind later. We're sure, Lydia said. Tell us what you need. I'll need a sworn statement from both of you about the terms of the loan as you understand them. Amounts, dates, everything you remember. Dawson was already thinking, shifting into business mode. I'll compare that against what I remember and what fragments I can find. It won't be perfect, but it should be enough to satisfy the head office. And the foreclosure deadline? Ethan asked. Suspended until we can verify the documentation, which means you have time. Dawson managed a tired smile. Ironic, isn't it? You've been racing a deadline for months, and now the fire has given you the one thing you needed most, more time. They spent the next 2 hours in the sheriff's office, giving their statements. Ethan recounted every detail he could remember, the original loan amount, his father's death, the payment notices, the accumulating interest. Lydia added what she knew from their conversations. Dawson took notes, asked clarifying questions, slowly building a new record from memory and testimony. By mid-morning, they had something that resembled official documentation. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough to work with. I'll send this to the head office today, Dawson said. Start the reconstruction process officially. In the meantime, the foreclosure is on hold. The property remains in your name, Mr. Hale." "And the payment?" Lydia asked. "I can't accept it yet. Not until the documentation is verified and approved." Dawson saw their expressions. "I know it's frustrating, but it's the only way to do this properly. Once everything is confirmed, you can make the payment and clear the debt completely." They left the sheriff's office into bright December morning. The 29th had arrived, the deadline that had haunted Ethan for months, and somehow they were still standing. Not through the victory they'd planned, but through an accident of fire and an insistence on honesty. "We could have kept the money," Ethan said as they walked back to the wagon. "Started over with $3,000 and no debt." "Would you have been able to live with that?" Lydia asked. He thought about it honestly. "No, probably not. Neither could I." She climbed onto the wagon seat. "My father used to say that character is what you do when no one would blame you for doing wrong. The fire gave us an easy way out. Taking it would have destroyed whatever character we've been building." Ethan climbed up beside her, picked up the reins. "You're a better person than I am." "I'm a more stubborn person. There's a difference." But she smiled as she said it. "Besides, we're partners. That means we keep each other honest." They drove back to the ranch slowly, both processing what had happened. The deadline had passed without resolution. The money sat heavy in Ethan's pocket, earned but not yet spent. The ranch remained theirs, but under a kind of limbo that could last months. It should have felt like failure. Instead, it felt like breathing room. "So what now?" Ethan asked as the ranch came into view. "Now we work." Lydia was looking at the property with new eyes. "We honor those commissions. I complete Patterson's fireplace screen properly, finish Caldwell's gate. We use the deposit money to buy supplies, fix what's broken, prepare for spring planting." "And the bank?" "Will sort itself out eventually. When they do, we pay what we owe and move forward." She glanced at him. "In the meantime, we build something real, something worth saving." The next weeks passed in a strange kind of peace. The pressure of the deadline was gone, lifted by disaster and suspended by bureaucracy. Ethan worked on repairing the ranch, fixing fences, patching the barn roof, preparing equipment for spring. Lydia worked in the forge, completing commission pieces with the same relentless skill that had saved them. Word spread about her work. More orders came in, small at first, then larger. A rancher wanted custom hinges for a new barn. A shopkeeper in town commissioned a decorative sign. The mine owners in Silverton started contacting her about projects for the spring. The money came in steady increments, not the desperate rush of that week before Christmas, but reliable income that let them plan ahead. Ethan used it to buy cattle, just 4 head to start, but it was a beginning. They planted winter wheat in one of the fields, gambling on late moisture. January turned to February. Letters arrived from the bank's head office, requesting additional information, verification, clarification. Dawson handled most of it, but occasionally they had to provide more statements, more details. The process was slow and bureaucratic, but it was moving forward. On a cold afternoon in late February, Ethan was working on repairing a section of fence when he saw a wagon approaching. His first thought was Garrett. The man had been conspicuously absent since the fire. But as it got closer, he recognized Dawson. The banker climbed down, carrying a leather folder. "Mr. Hale, is Miss Brooks here?" "In the forge. What's this about?" "Good news, I hope. Could you both come to the house?" They gathered around the kitchen table, Lydia still in her forge apron, soot on her hands. Dawson opened the folder, pulled out several documents. "The head office has completed its review," he said. "They've verified the loan terms based on our statements, cross-referenced with correspondence they had on file from your father's original application. Everything checks out." Ethan felt his heart rate pick up. Meaning the debt is officially reinstated. $3,847.52 due immediately. Dawson pulled out another paper. "And I'm authorized to accept payment today, if you're ready." Lydia looked at Ethan. He looked back, and in that moment, they were back in the Denver market, counting money by lamplight. Back in Silverton, racing against sunset. Back in that first conversation when she demanded honesty and he'd finally given it. "We're ready," Ethan said. He went upstairs, retrieved the money from where they'd kept it safe for 2 months. Every dollar they'd earned that desperate week in December, carefully preserved. He brought it downstairs and counted it out on the table, watching the bills pile up. $3,847.52. Dawson counted it twice, made notations in his ledger, then pulled out a final document. This is the satisfaction of debt. Sign here, and the loan is paid in full. The ranch is yours, free and clear. Ethan's hand shook slightly as he signed. Beside him, Lydia signed as witness. Dawson added his own signature, stamped it with the bank's seal. "Congratulations," he said, handing Ethan the document. "The nightmare is officially over." After Dawson left, Ethan and Lydia sat at the table in silence, looking at the paper that said they'd won. The ranch was theirs. The debt was gone. Everything they'd fought for, everything they'd worked for, it was real now. "We should celebrate," Ethan said finally. "How?" "I have no idea. I'm too tired to think of anything." Lydia laughed, the sound slightly hysterical. "We save a ranch through fire and bureaucracy and impossible odds, and we're too exhausted to celebrate properly." "We'll celebrate tomorrow. Today we just—" He stopped, not sure how to finish. "Exist," Lydia supplied. "Today we just exist without crisis." They went outside, walked across the ranch that was definitively theirs now. The late afternoon sun was warm, one of those early hints that winter wouldn't last forever. In the fields, the winter wheat was already showing green shoots. In the barn, the 4 cattle looked healthy. The forge stood ready for tomorrow's work. It wasn't prosperous yet, wasn't fully recovered. But it was theirs, and it was alive, and that was enough. "I've been thinking," Lydia said as they reached the far fence line, "about the original arrangement, the advertisement you placed." Ethan felt tension creep into his shoulders. "What about it?" "You were seeking a wife. I came here expecting that partnership, but we've spent 3 months working together, and we've never actually discussed—" She paused. "What we are to each other." "Does it need a label?" "Eventually, yes." She turned to face him. "I'm not asking for promises or commitments right now, but I need to know if this is temporary or if you see a future where we're more than just business partners." Ethan thought about the past 3 months. The desperate race to save the ranch, the long hours working side by side. The way she'd refused to let him quit when quitting was the easy choice. The way she'd insisted on honesty even when a lie would have been convenient. "I see a future," he said carefully, "but I'm not sure what shape it takes yet. We've been in crisis mode so long, I don't know what normal looks like with us." "Then maybe we figure out normal first." Lydia's voice was soft. "Build our partnership on solid ground before we try to build anything more." "That seems wise." "But Ethan?" She stepped closer. "I want you to know I'm not going anywhere. This place, this life we're building, it's mine too now. Whether that's as your business partner or eventually something more, I'm committed." He reached out, took her hand. Her palm was rough with calluses from forge work, her fingers strong. "Good. Because I don't think I could do this without you." "You probably could. You're more capable than you think." "Maybe. But I wouldn't want to." He squeezed her hand gently. "Everything good that's happened in the last 3 months happened because we worked together. I'd like to keep doing that." "So would I." They stood there as the sun sank lower, hands clasped, looking out over land that was damaged but healing. Behind them, the house needed paint and repairs. The barn needed a new roof. The fields needed attention. There was work enough for years, but it was their work now, their future to build. Spring came slowly, grudgingly, the way it always did in the high plains. The snow melted, revealing brown grass that would eventually turn green. The winter wheat thrived. Lydia's commission work brought in steady money, enough to buy more cattle, more equipment, supplies for the forge. They developed routines. Ethan handled the ranch work, Lydia handled the metal work, and in the evenings they worked together on repairs and plans. Sometimes they talked for hours. Sometimes they worked in comfortable silence. The partnership deepened without either of them quite noticing how it happened. In April, Thomas Morrison brought news that Garrett had bought property in Wyoming, was moving his operations north. The threat that had hung over them for so long simply evaporated, Garrett moving on to easier targets. "Good riddance," Lydia said when she heard. In May, Lydia completed the full commission for Patterson's house. Railings, gates, decorative pieces throughout. The payment was enough to buy a dozen more cattle and hire a hand to help with the summer work. In June, they stood in the newly planted fields and watched the crops growing strong. The drought had broken sometime during the winter, regular rains returning to replenish the wells and nourish the earth. The land was healing. One evening in late June, as they sat on the porch watching fireflies dance across the yard, Ethan brought up the question that had been on his mind for weeks. "The original arrangement," he said, "the one we set aside to focus on survival. I think it's time we addressed it properly." Lydia set down the piece she'd been working on, a small decorative hook, something she made in her spare time now. "All right, what are you proposing?" "A real partnership, legal, official, permanent." He turned to face her. "I'm asking you to marry me, Lydia. Not because I placed an advertisement or because we had an arrangement, but because I can't imagine doing this with anyone else." She was quiet for a moment, her expression unreadable in the gathering dusk. "That's quite a speech." "I've been practicing. I can tell." She smiled then, that rare, unguarded smile that still surprised him every time. "Yes, I'll marry you, on one condition." "Name it." "We do it as equals, true partners in everything. The ranch, the forge, the decisions, all of it. No assumptions about roles or expectations. We build this marriage the same way we built everything else, together, honestly, with neither of us in charge. I wouldn't have it any other way." They were married in July by the circuit judge who came through town once a month. It was a simple ceremony, witnessed by Thomas Morrison and a few neighbors who'd watched them fight to save the ranch. No fancy dress, no elaborate celebration, just two people making promises they intended to keep. Afterward, standing outside the courthouse in the summer heat, Lydia looked at the marriage certificate with a wry expression. "Not quite how I expected this to turn out when I answered your advertisement." "Better or worse?" Ethan asked. "Different, harder, more real." She folded the paper carefully. "Better." They drove back to the ranch as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. The fields were green and productive. The cattle grazed peacefully. The forge stood ready for tomorrow's work. "You know what I realized?" Lydia said as they pulled into the yard. "You never actually got what you advertised for." "What do you mean?" "Your advertisement promised the woman a stable future and established homestead. You didn't provide that. The ranch was dying when I arrived. Instead, I got crisis and chaos and the hardest work of my life." Ethan winced. "When you put it that way..." "I'm not complaining." She climbed down from the wagon. "I'm just pointing out that sometimes what we need is different from what we think we want. You thought you needed a wife to save the ranch. What you actually needed was a partner who wouldn't let you give up." "And what did you need?" She thought about it, looking around at the ranch they'd saved together. "I needed to prove I could build something that mattered, that my skills had value beyond what people assumed a woman could do. I needed to fight for something and win." She looked at him. "I needed you to trust me enough to let me try." They stood in the yard as darkness settled, the summer night warm around them. Inside the house, lamps glowed. In the barn, the horses shifted and settled. Everything was quiet, peaceful, finally stable. "We should go in," Ethan said. "Early start tomorrow." "There's always an early start tomorrow." "True, but now we're doing it together, legally," Lydia laughed. "Such a romantic." "You knew what you were getting." "I did." She took his hand. "And I'd do it all again. Every desperate moment, every impossible deadline, every time we almost lost everything. I'd do it all again." "Even the lies at the beginning?" "Even those. Because they led here." She squeezed his hand. "Come on, husband. Let's go see what the rest of our lives looks like." They walked into the house together, closing the door on the past and opening it to whatever future they'd build. The ranch would have good years and bad years. There would be droughts and debts, crises and challenges. But they'd face them together, two people who'd learned that the strongest foundations were built from honesty, hard work, and the refusal to quit when quitting seemed like the only option. Outside, the stars came out above the plains. The wind blew across healing fields. And in a house that had nearly been lost, two people began their real partnership. Not the one they'd planned, but the one they'd forged through fire and determination and desperate faith in each other. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything.